A very warm welcome to Info Insight. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for joining us. July 27th, 2023. The Vice President of the Republic of Colombia visited Barbados for the Reparations and Racial Healing Study Tour. During her very busy schedule, the Vice President agreed to an exclusive interview with the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. My colleague, journalist Wendy Burke, met with the Vice President and her interpreter at the Hilton Hotel on the Needham Point Peninsula on the outskirts of our UNESCO World Heritage Site. Wendy?
Good evening to you, Ms. Vice President. I am speaking with Vice President of Colombia, Francia Elena Marquez Mina. Welcome to Barbados. Tell us about your experience as an activist and how it prepared you for the political journey that you now find yourself on.
Hola, Wendy.
Hello, Wendy.
Quiero en primer lugar saludar.
Please allow me, first of all, to greet all the inhabitants of this beautiful island of Barbados. Thank you so much for your time, for this interview. As regards your question about my activism, I believe that I never thought that I would be in this position. I was an activist for the first time at the age of 13, together with my community, defending our territory, especially fighting to make sure that the main river that crosses our territory be protected from a dam project, and the whole community got involved in that struggle. And I think it sparked a kind of motivation in me, because I had a very close connection with the river, just like you may have that connection with the sea, for example. It's like another living being of the territory, right? This is the relationship I had with the river. And if the river, called the Ovejas River, was taken away from us with this dam project, our territory would probably die too. And so I started raising my voice. First it was through the arts. I loved music, I loved theater, I loved dance, and it was really through culture that I became more involved in the struggle for ethnic and territorial rights of Afro-Colombians. And that was when I really started discovering myself as a woman of African descent. I had grown up in an ancestral territory where the colonial system taught us to feel ashamed of our own identity, of our history. And as a little girl, I always heard that we were descendants of slaves, and I was ashamed of that. I didn't want to be perceived like the descendant of enslaved people. The thing is, the story that was told was not really right. My ancestors were never born as slaves, they were enslaved. And this started to spark a series of questions about my own identity and who I was. We didn't have many references about the African continent either. So the stories we would hear about Africa, or what we would see on television, were children starving with flies around their mouths, looking really miserable. Now, this is not the whole story. Of course there is poverty, but Africa is a whole continent that has also had its own struggles for the emancipation and development of its people. And I think I started coming across this history of resistance and struggle, all the struggles of many Africans for their dignity. And I think it was another inspiration, and I started really getting involved in the defense of environmental rights. Then I started struggling and fighting not only for the river, but also more globally, fighting against extractive economies and illegal mining. I started organizing women in associations that started growing to defend the ethnic and territorial rights. This is, in a nutshell, what pushed me to keep raising my voice and using my rebellious spirit. I am a pretty rebellious woman. I don't take things for granted. I don't remain silent in the face of injustice. I am really outraged by injustice. And I think that this character was really shaped by the women of my community who really behaved the same way and never accept injustice.
Since becoming vice president over a year ago, how have you been, one, adjusting to the new role, as well as your portfolio in terms of the Minister of Equality and Equity? How have you been using that rebellious voice to guide you?
Bueno, primero llegar a la...
Well, becoming vice president was a new experience. Moving from activism on the social stage to politics is, of course, a very different stage, so to speak. I was afraid of corruption, thinking that people may criticize me, as they do with so many politicians, for supposedly, or accusing me of being corrupt or attacking me for things of the kind. And so I asked many people around me whether it was a good idea or not to get involved in politics. We finally made that decision. We decided with the people I was working with to run and to really get involved in politics. We had to do that, otherwise we would be threatened for many more years and eventually become or be assassinated. And so I started really criticizing traditional politics. I started to criticize traditional politicians to which politicians who never really consider the poorer of the country, the poorest of the country, as people who are worthy of rights, just like Eduardo Galeano in his poem said, these are the nobodies, people who are traditionally excluded by the traditional political system, people who only who are completely ignored by the traditional politicians, who only wish to maintain the status quo. And several people started really identifying themselves with this discourse, with these criticisms, young people and other people who are traditionally marginalized from politics. For over 20 years, I was running away from death, escaping from different attacks and assassination attempts, often supported by the very state, because I was a critical voice, and sometimes the state himself is not able to guarantee the citizens' rights. And so I decided to be involved in politics, and I joined a consultation process together with the now President Gustavo Petro. He got the most number of votes and therefore became the presidential candidate, and I came second. So I became his vice presidential candidate. This was not easy, of course, because racism and patriarchal criticism started appearing, and we tried to rally different forces around us to see if we could make it all the way to power. Now, people of African descent, who are quite numerous in Colombia, made the decision as soon as they saw my face to vote for me, and therefore they voted for President Petro and myself. Same thing for young people, women, indigenous peoples. All these population groups are the ones who voted for me the most. So our policy is now based on the guarantee of rights of those marginalized population groups. Now, what has happened in the last year? Well, my main role is to coordinate institutional policies and strategies that are very specific, such as the connection of people of African descent at the international level. For example, what I'm doing here in the framework of this international meeting on historic reparation that's going on this week in Barbados is seeking to connect the people of African descent in Colombia to their counterparts in the region, in the Caribbean and in Africa, promoting South-South cooperation between Latin America, the Caribbean and Africa with a clear reconnection and historic reparation agenda in order to defend the dignity of people of African descent and the whole African diaspora throughout the world. And this is the progress that we have done in this field, and I believe my presence here shows it, because it is such an important moment in this struggle to truly put this topic on the agenda and recover the dignity that has been stolen from people of African descent and the African diaspora. Second, my role in Colombia is to articulate, to coordinate the work of different state institutions seeking to guarantee the rights of people of African descent and indigenous peoples. And then the issue of women's rights also falls under my mandate. We have just created a new ministry in Colombia, the Ministry of Equity and Equality, which will start functioning in the coming months, which is why we also created within this ministry a deputy ministry or a vice ministry for women specifically. There'll be another one working on territorial equality, another one dedicated to a diverse population, the disabled, LGBTIQ+ population, and a specific portfolio for racial equality and ethnic peoples' equality.
Now we're speaking on the issue of equality and so on. I know there's a strong passion and fervor you have for culture and Pan-Africanism. How, apart from yourself pushing that agenda, how are you going to mobilize outside of the commission you're setting up to get more Colombians to understand that the people of African descent matter just as much and that people of difference also matter just as much?
Bueno, este es un desafío grande.
Well, this is indeed a challenge, not only for Colombia, but for the world. The world was shaped, and especially the current economic system, which is the one that is leading our planet to its death due to the climate crisis. This system was created on the basis of colonialism, of slavery and structural racism. These structures of oppression are precisely the challenge that we must take on as a society. Colombia is a rather conservative country, which means that, of course, promoting those ideas is also challenging. I am the first vice president of African descent of my country. I have received so many racist attacks. It used to be really a sort of silent racism, but since I have become the vice president, many people actually can't stand that idea of having a woman like me in such a position, and messages of racial hatred have started appearing, saying that, you know, I was not legitimate in that position. So it's not an easy task. We're facing racism every day, within the government and outside the government as well. There are people within government who can't accept that a woman like me gives them orders or is their boss. And some people can't stand seeing me on television leading policies and managing portfolios and staff. So I think this has been an opportunity to make racism visible and precisely take a stance to transform that. We have been shaped by a culture of violence, and deconstructing this culture of violence and build a culture of justice is precisely the challenge, which is why the connection between Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America is so strategic for that purpose. I was very privileged to meet Prime Minister Motley today. She's really one of the fighters who have been one of the most vocal advocates of historic reparations. She has positioned that debate globally, as well as climate justice, the need to transform the international financial system that would allow the poorest and the most marginalized to have access to development, to education, an education that empowers them, that transforms them, but also the power to reconnect between peoples in our economic activity, in our cultural and social activity. Such is our challenge, and this is what we are working on.
Okay. I understand the youth of Colombia are also one of the areas you have great concern about.
Bueno, yo creo que la juventud siempre ha sido rebelde.
I believe the youth has always been rebellious and will keep being rebellious. I'm a relatively young woman, I'm only 41. And of course I've always used my rebellious spirit. It's something that fills us with hope and generating change in society. It's always through youth movements that change has happened in humanity. Now I can say that I am happy to know that the youth is really considering different aspects and agendas that are affecting the world population, such as climate change. This is a concern to them. The young people who came out to vote for us wanted an alternative. They wanted us to protect nature. They wanted us to work to guarantee access to water. They wanted us to protect the rivers and the Andean highlands. This is fundamental, and children are also raising their voices. Children and youth telling adults, look, life is becoming extinct and you are responsible of what's happening. I think that this is a revolutionary attitude, and it is happening through the arts, through sports, through culture, through all sorts and forms of rebellion. So I really want to tell the youth never to stop being rebellious, because this is a way to push for justice. When I am criticized, when I am attacked in Colombia, it's always the young people who come out in my defense. Whenever I am a victim of an injustice for some reason, it's always the youth who raises their voice. 2 years ago, there was a social uprising in my country. Young people who were asking for social justice and peace and the guarantee of their rights. So I hope young people will still raising their voices so that we can together transform our countries.
Okay, and if you were to offer some words to the youth of Barbados in terms of how they could help transform their country, what would those words be?
Bueno, primero tengo que decirles que Barbados está haciendo.
I must say that Barbados is leading a tremendous change, not only for this island and this country, but for the whole world. And you have a leader who is a true champion. Mia Mottley has really put on the table international debates that no one ever dared to address before. Of course, she cannot be left alone. She needs her community, she needs her people to support her, to really carry out this action and change. I wouldn't have advice for the young people of Barbados considering the leader that they already have. It's really up to them to look at themselves in the mirror and think of the decisions they need to make to transform their country and the world.
You started out as an environmental activist, a number of environmental concerns, the illegal mining, the river, etc. We're now facing major issues with climate change. What are some of the policies, processes, committees, what have you, that you've been able to put in place to try to reverse what is going on climatically?
Bueno, en nuestro país el mayor desafío en el que estamos.
The main challenge on which we are working in our country is an energy transition that would allow us to basically come out of a carbon-based economy and switch to a more sustainable economy. This really is done through education and a social culture, and just a culture and a way we relate to consumption that needs to be changed. This is what we are doing as a government. Of course, our countries don't have enough resources to really finance this green transition. So Colombia, Barbados, France and Kenya are pushing for a policy of dead swaps in exchange for climate action. So we basically need the countries who have led the world towards the climate crisis, those who have had the greatest environmental impact through the largest greenhouse gas emissions, help the countries who do not have enough resources to really adapt to climate change.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Vice President. It has been an honor to have interviewed you. And once again, do enjoy our island.
No, gracias a ustedes.
Thank you so very much. Greetings to all of you and thanks to the Caribbean and CARICOM for inviting me. One thing I want to mention is something I said today in the press conference. If we talk about historic reparations, we cannot forget Haiti. Haiti is a country that really helped freeing our whole continent. They have led the Caribbean and Latin America towards freedom, and we must give back to Haiti what they gave us one day, which is freedom. Let us not forget the people of Haiti.
Gracias.
And thank you very much, Madam Vice President. This has been Info Insight, an exclusive interview with the Vice President of the Republic of Colombia and CBC's Wendy Burke on the occasion of her official visit to Barbados, July 27th, 2023. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time.